crew, welcome back to another Spraycasso tutorial. In today's tutorial we're going to be covering more advanced techniques. We're going to be concentrating on clouds and just different effects with multi-layering. As you can see, this is going to take your skills even further than what we were before. So without further ado, let's do a quick recap on the materials that we're going to be needing for today's spray painting. For the art of spray paint, you're going to need a mask, preferably one with filters, soft tip tools, a Sharpie, different size cups or lids, the Spraycasso tools. If you don't know how to make them, there's a video on my website that shows you how. The Spraycasso tool, a canvas, Posterboard, masking tape, magazine sheet, sea sponge, but most of all, your favorite brand of spray paints. Alright crew, so if you guys are ready, grab your spray paints. Let's begin. We begin by adding some colors to our canvas. We added some blue, some pink, and then we covered it in black, and with a magazine sheet we removed most of the black, creating a really nice texture. Now I'm going to show you guys a cool little technique that is used quite frequently to create the effect like there's light on the planet. We use a little bit of white. You guys can learn more about this technique on some of my earlier tutorials where we covered a lot of space paintings. And we add white on top, a little bit of black here on the bottom, and that creates a really nice 3D effect on our planet. It's a really simple technique, and I recommend you definitely give it a go if you're going to start creating planets, and if you want your planets to be a little more realistic. Now using a copper lead, you would put your stencil on top of it and then cover everything in black, making your planet nice and round, and that gives you a nice 3D effect. And it would most definitely make a phenomenal looking planet. Now I'm going to show you guys a more advanced technique on adding highlights to your planet. Even though your planet is completely done and it already has some highlights based on the colors that we added on the first layers, this technique can add a little bit more to your planet. Now I had added a little bit of light blue on it, but because of the black it became darker blue. So what I did, spray painted a little bit of light blue onto a magazine sheet, and now I'm tapping that on top of the planet. And that'll give us that same looking texture and the same looking pattern, but it's also going to give us some highlights. Yep, this is a very awesome technique. I definitely encourage you guys to experiment with it, and it doesn't necessarily have to be light blue. We could go over it and add some purple, some red, some oranges. Let's add a little bit of red. Now once you mix red with blue, it becomes a purple, so you'll get some purple hues in there. If it's too much, you see what I did on there? I just tapped it offside the canvas. Tap, tap, tap. It's a very simple, and look how much vibrancy it brought to our planet. Add a little bit of purple on top of this. This is the colors that come with the Spraycasso kit, guys. So if you're wondering what kind of paints I use, that's the ones I use. Now if you see other colors that I may not have on the kit, the Spraycasso brand works great with most spray paints out there. So I'm able to use different brands in collaboration with mine, and the colors become phenomenal. Alright, so let's go ahead and put our stencil. I think we're at a good point. I make sure I cover some of that light that we added earlier, some of that white. Make sure you grab some of that little bit of black that I just added, so it still keeps that 3D effect going into our planet. Now with a little bit of blue, I'm just going to go ahead and make our planet nice and round. So I'm covering everything up, and I'm also adding some different colors. I went ahead and sped up the video here so you guys can see I'm adding some oranges, a little bit of blue, some pink. Now guys, I know I've seen a lot of spray painters do this. This is how you create your clouds. You just tear off a piece of cardboard and then you start adding your clouds. Now I left the can here to show you guys how much of an inconvenience it can be if you don't remove the can. Now I've gotten a lot of wonderful emails and people asking me like, well, I don't want to mess up my planet looks great, I don't want to do it. Guys, trying to work around it may cause more damage to the painting than if you just try and have a spray control and just remove the stencil. Guys, use the cloud stencil and start to use that to prevent overmist falling onto your planet. So I'm just using different colors here. You guys remember the water tinting technique? That's a technique where I create the water using blue and white, and you kind of blend them together to make water. But if you wanted color, you add hints of different colors on top of that water. Well, that's what we're doing here with our clouds. I added some light blues, some pinks, some oranges, and you're gonna have to just keep working at it until you get that desired effect. Now, I don't want the clouds to have that same looking pattern, right? Like it has right now. So the way you change that is you add highlights on top of them. Yep, add a little bit of blue, and look at that, it starts to soften up. Guys, experiment with this. You have to experiment with this. If at first you don't succeed, you keep trying. You don't have to directly do this onto a painting. You know what? Get a spare piece of cardboard or poster board and start practicing there. This is what I did. I got the hang of how I wanted my clouds to look. Added a little bit more highlights. Now, I think it would add to the effect if we add, you guys remember how to create the stars? That's right, using the star technique. So you're just going to want to aim your can a good 45-degree angle away from your media and very gently let it sputter down. You see those little stars that it created there? I love doing that. Now you can spray paint a little bit of paint on your fingers and kind of splatter that into your painting. I think that's great too. It creates really good, but this is my favorite technique of creating stars. Now I'm gonna go over it once again. Working with the clouds is you're gonna have to use your cloud stencil that you made. And notice what I'm doing. I'm feathering the paint. I'm not just like staying stationary on one spot. I'm feathering the paint, creating that illusion of different colors and highlights throughout our clouds. Now, obviously I'm gonna have a sun here, so I want the top portion of my painting to have more vibrant colors. Yellow and oranges in this case. Okay, now here on the bottom, I used the same stencil that I used to create the clouds up above to create my terrain here on the background, and we'll go through that here shortly. I'm gonna create some trees using some blue and some red, so it'll give us that nice dark purple. So we're sticking with the same basic colors, purples, pinks, blues. You mix them together and you get the same variants of shades. This is how you create the terrain. Very simple, right? It's exactly like the clouds. It's just about spray manipulation. If you concentrate too much area and dark colors in one spot, you'll get this terrain looking one. If you feather it, you'll start to soften up the edges, creating more of a cloud effect. See? Same stencil, different techniques of spray control, and you'll be able to create these different layers. Okay. I'm going to create a distant terrain here on the background. I'm just tapping into some blue, a little bit of purple, and using the sea sponge, I'm just mirroring upwards. The same as the grass technique, guys, the same as the trees that we created here earlier. It's just different strokes. I'm going from down, up, and that creates this little terrain in the background. Now, using the soft tip tools, I'm tapping into some white and then creating some basic details in the background, not adding a whole lot of detail. Notice the waterfall, it was just a couple of strokes just to create the effect of a waterfall. It's I'm adding the water line. This is the line that separates the water from the terrain. So I'm just making that a little bit more clear. I'm using the smallest soft tip tool that I could find. You can use the Spraycasso tool as well. Just know that that'll create a thicker line. Now, because we're working with depth and distance here, I want these lines to be a little bit thinner. Now, I went through, added a little bit of hot pink on top of my layers that we just added. One quick spray. You don't have to concentrate a whole lot of it. Just quick spray over it. Created different water lines to create the water ripples. Now here with some black, you guys have seen me use my infamous Spraycasso tool. I love this thing. I can't tell you how much I would be lost without it. This is such a great tool to create terrains and mountains and oh, you name it. So many different techniques, waters. So if you guys are interested on it, go take a look at the website. I created a piece of terrain here that is closer to us. And so you guys know the technique, right? You create the edges and then with a little bit of black, you can just fill in the rest. And it just gives you that really nice fading technique on a piece of terrain. Now using a little bit of orange and yellow, I'm creating the highlights just on the edges. See, very easy to do. This tool will help you blend the colors together. You can use a magazine sheet. if you want to give that a try. That works very well as well. Just a couple of strokes up and down, and look at that. That piece of terrain just comes alive. It gives you different highlights, different colors, different oranges and blends of orange and yellow. Using the grass technique and a sea sponge, tapping into some black, I'm creating just random strands of grass throughout our painting. Different strokes, you can create little leaves, little, just use your imagination. Don't just create grass strands, add to it, add to the life of the painting, to the plant life. Just adding different strands here. Now I know there's going to be some areas where you may not want to add your grass strands, guys. I'm telling you, you go out to nature, you'll see a nice pretty rock, but then surrounding the rock you'll also see a lot of plant life, a lot of little flowers, and so don't be afraid to cover some of the rocks that you created. My personal technique is I always create the terrain and then I start adding the grass on top of it. It's really up to you. Now, these little sparkles on the water, I've gotten a lot of wonderful comments on this. Guys, I'm just using the soft tip tool. I tap into some white. Quick strokes left and right creates little water lines. If I just tap one small dot, it'll create that little glowing effect that everybody likes. I personally love it too. So just creating quick lines. This is all there is to it. You see that little dot? First you add a dot and then you turn that into a line that gives you that nice little, it looks like it's shining, almost glowing. Now, to do that glow, I just tapped into some white. You're gonna have to get it just right on the tip of the soft tip tool and just make little dots. Yeah, that's it. Find the areas in your water or landscape or plants that you're adding this light effect to, and just add one quick drop. Notice I selected where I added the drops. It was the areas that kind of seemed like it had a little bit of a glow to it. Add one dot to it and it makes your painting really stand out. Definitely encourage you guys to give that a try. A little bit of yellow here. I'm just adding yellow to this lower right hand corner of our painting. I just think it'll balance it out because we have a lot of yellow on the sky. Rule of thumb, guys, whatever you do to the sky, whatever sky colors you have, you want to kind of incorporate that to your water or terrain on the bottom. We added our stencil back with a little bit of white. I'm just going to create that nice little sunburst. Now you may have to practice with this, guys. It takes a little bit of practice, but the effect is pretty awesome. Now, coming down here at the very bottom of the paint, I'm just going to go ahead and add some highlights to it. This is to our plant life. I'm going to use some yellow. Now yellow, it's a very vibrant color, especially since we're using it in contrast with the hot pinks that we have in the background. So it will really stand out, and that's what I want. I want people to be able to feel like they're standing so close to this piece of terrain that they can see the highlights. So I'm just going to add this to our plants here on the bottom. You can definitely add other colors. Now look at the strokes that I'm using. To create nice little flower types, I do taps. Tap, 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 tap. To create grass strands, well, I use the grass strand technique. I go upwards. I swift upwards. Kind of like what I'm doing here. Now, I'm going to use a lighter touch of color. I'm going to use pink. This is the pink that comes in the Spraycasso kit, guys. If you don't have that, then any kind of pink you have. You can mix red and white. It'll give you a variance of pink. If you have the fluorescent pink, add a little bit of white to it, and it'll give you a nice lighter version of it. You can use that throughout your paintings, and notice how much it stands out. Different colors will definitely bring your painting into a more colorful aspect of the spectrum. For a great outcome, it's important to have the right ingredients, the right techniques, the right tools. This is what you were able to create in just a few minutes using everyday household items. Straight edges to create that sunburst up there. We use some cups and lids to create the planet. Sea sponge. Look at this. It's fantastic. But like anything else, crew, this is going to require patience, practice, and dedication. And you can't be afraid to push the boundaries. So let's do that. If you guys are ready, let's continue this. Let's add more to our painting. Now, as I mentioned, there's absolutely nothing wrong with this painting. I think this is a fantastic painting. But if you're going to take it further, you're going to have to overcome some of your fears of adding additional layers to a painting that you believe it's already done. And I know, guys, I'm from experience here, I've gone through the same deal, right? I'm like, oh no, this painting is good. I don't want to mess it up. Well, if you want to take it further, you're going to have to take the chance. We're going to use some red and some sea sponge. So I already have envisioned what I want to create, and I want to add a nice tree to this painting. And I think one of the colors that'll best contrast some of the background layers, which is our hot pinks and our blues and our yellows, is bright red. So I'm using the Spraycasso red, and I'm going to start creating the background leaves. This is going to be the leaves that I'm going to overlap later on with a different layer. So I'm just going to start creating some tree leaves here. Now I know, and I get this a lot, especially when people are watching me paint in my studio or when I used to paint live. They're like, no, what are you doing? That is good right there. Or what are you doing? Have confidence in your skills. You have to have confidence in your skills and what you're doing. And know that no matter what you do, as Master Bob Ross said, there's only happy little accidents, right? And you can always fix them. You can always go add and add to them. So I created my first layer, and that's the tree leaves, bright red. Now, using the Spraycasso funnel, and I'm going to use the baby Spraycasso funnel, tiny. This is great to create like finer details. I don't want my tree to be extremely large. That's about as width as it's going to come out. If I need it thicker, then I'll just go back up and add a few more layers to it. But look, now I'm able to add a layer that overlapped the first layer of tree leaves. Now I'm thinking I'm going to make it about this thick, so I'm just going to go over it a few times. Problem about the baby Spraycasso funnel, it doesn't hold as much paint as the bigger ones. It's a trade-off. It's a trade-off for sure. Oh, and see, and that's how accidents happen at times. So make sure you clear your area space from your spray cans or anything that may fall onto your paintings. So as I was saying, it's a trade-off between the amount of paint that you can hold on the funnel versus the thickness that it's going to come out. So I'd rather just keep spraying into this baby funnel and making the tree thicker and thicker by just adding several layers on top of it. Beauty about it is you can create thinner details. So I can add thinner branches. I can add twigs. So again, if you guys don't know how to make a funnel, go to the website. We definitely have several videos on how to create different size funnels and different types of funnels. Some that are made out of plastic, duct tape, cardboard, just items that you have laying around. I'm going to create some different smaller branches here. Okay. Like I said, it's a bit of a trade-off. I may have to use several more sprays into the funnel, but I'd rather work slowly and surely. Now we've created some branches there on the background. I'm going to mix some orange with the red that we added earlier. Using the same sea sponge, I'm now tapping into some of that orange. I'm going to create some lighter looking tree leaves. This can be highlights, so I'm going to add that on the edges. Not as much into the inner part of the tree, but around the edges. This is going to be one of the layers that we're adding. So tap, tap, tap. And you can see a little bit of a difference, not a whole lot. If I wanted to see more of a difference, then I'd start adding yellows. And I think we'll add some more yellows here as we get closer to the edges to create that effect, because we have such a bright starburst or sunburst in the background that obviously that sunburst is going to come into our tree and lighten up some of the areas. So I'm still just overlapping here. The trunk. It's important you overlap the trunk, guys. This is a mistake I've seen. Spray painters that are new to the art, that they'll avoid touching the trunk. Like, oh, no, I don't want to mess it up. The trunk looks good. Gotta do it. Gotta do it if you want to make it look realistic. Here we're ready to add our lighter highlights on top of the oranges that we added. That makes our oranges our mid-tones. So now you have your light highlights on top of that. And notice how I'm just sticking to the edges of the tree leaves. This too will require some practice, crew, because in many cases, you know, it's kind of like whenever you learn a new technique or a new style, you tend to overuse that a lot. I think this tends to happen with highlights too. There is such a thing as over highlighting everything. So this is a technique that I personally had to master myself. And it's not easy. It's, again, practice, right? Practice. So I'm just adding certain highlights. I'm not covering the entire tree with the highlights, which is a mistake that tends to occur when we're just learning the technique. I'm just gonna keep working on it. Tap, tap, tap. Now notice what I'm doing. I'm tapping. I'm not using grass strand technique. I'm just tapping. It's tap, 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 tap. Details make a realistic painting. Now I'm not going for a super ultra realistic painting because obviously we have some very mystical colors in the background. But I do want to add a touch of realism to it. So what I'm using here is my soft tip tool, and I'm just adding the same colors that we added for our leaves, some oranges, some reds. I'll even add some yellows, and I'm giving the effect that there's a nice little breeze coming through and the leaves are blowing away. The tricky part to this technique is not to overuse your reds or overuse your yellows. You kind of have to have a nice little balance, right, of oranges and some light yellows and some reds, and you might want to mix or blend your paints together when doing this. And basically, guys, it looks like a bunch of little dots when I added them. This is the same technique that I did to create some of the water sparkles underneath, but now I tap and then I smear. I very gently smear downward. That creates a leaf-like effect, you know, if you may. Now notice on the trunk here we had a silhouette of a trunk when we first added. We just added some black on top of it. Now with the soft tip tool, I went ahead and added some orange to this side, and now I'm adding a highlight of yellow. I'm just gonna go up and down, and this will make it look like the sun is really hitting this area. This is the same technique that I used to create the effect of light bouncing off of rocks and other plants. In fact, I'll go through and I'll add the same technique to certain parts of the tree leaves that we added that are closer to the sunburst. It gives it a nice glowing effect like this. See that? And all it is, we're just using the Spraycasso yellow. This is the same yellow that comes in the kit. Just tapping onto the edges. And now notice how it looks like it's glowing. That's it. That's it, crew. The secrets of the spray paint masters right there. We're going to keep adding that same technique right here to add our highlights. Now notice I'm not going entirely throughout the center of the tree or anything. I'm sticking to the edges, just the outer edges. Using our black and our sea sponge. This is the same sea sponge that we used to create the tree leaves earlier. Now notice what I did there. I just tore off the used part. It's a nice little trick so you can conserve and reuse most of the sea sponges that you use. Now notice the wind is blowing from left to right, so you have the nice little tree leaves blowing. We have to do the same to the grass strands below, so I'm adding a whole new set of layers, given they're silhouette layers for now, but they're blowing from left to right as well. Now I said it's a silhouette layer at the moment because we're overlapping the layers that we had underneath, which is the existing grass, the flowers, the highlighted rocks, with the intent that eventually we're gonna add our midtones, our greens, our oranges, and our highlights to this new layer of grass. I can't stress out enough, it is the details that make the realistic painting. Again, we're not going for hyper realistic, but we're going to realistic enough that it'll draw the viewer in and say, oh, you know, I can imagine myself sitting there feeling the breeze. This is what you want to do. This is just the details and the small actions that you do to your painting that'll create that effect. Now keep in mind, right now it's a silhouette layer. We're gonna have to go back and add new flowers, new midtones, new highlights. So I'm just gonna tap into some orange, a little bit of yellow. Now see what I do here? I tap off to see what it's gonna look like. I want my pattern. I want to know what kind of pattern I'm putting down. So now I'm just gonna go through to add the flowers, the grass strands, and it is that simple. The beauty about spray paint, it's how fast it dries. this is both the blessing and the curse, right? Because there's times that you wish you could have a little bit more time to color blend. That's where clear coat comes in. Now in this case, notice I concentrated on the tree leaves. By doing that, it gave me enough time that all these layers right here on the lower left hand side have already been dried. So I can add brighter colors without the fear of the orange blending with the green turning into a brown. Everything is dried. So keep that in mind. You also, part of color manipulation and layer manipulation of your spray paints is knowing the amount of time things take to dry and why you want certain things to dry. There's certain blends, for example the rocks, when I first created them, when I added the black layer, I didn't want the black layer to completely dry. When I added my highlights on top of it, I was counting that the highlights and the midtones would blend into the black, giving us darker tones, darker, earthier tones. So keep that in mind, crew. It's very important depending on how many details you're wanting to add. Let's do a quick comparison to see how much the painting has evolved since we first started creating the background. You can clearly see how much more brightness the additional midtones, the tree, the highlights on the grass has brought to the painting. The painting ultimately evolved because we wanted to add more to it. So I definitely encourage you guys to give that a go if you guys ever feel like you could add a few more layers to it. Let's take a quick look at what we've done. Created a sunburst using our straight edges, stars using the star technique, our planet. We added this tree with the nice little leaves blowing away, nice background terrain, lots of sparklies on the water. You guys saw how to create that. Beautiful grass. I definitely think that the grass adds to the overall feel of this painting. Alright crew, well this was a lot of fun to paint. Thank you guys for joining us. Until next time crew, keep those cans shaking. Later guys.